Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum. I'm here today at the British Royal Armouries taking a look at some of the prototype submachine guns in their extensive reference collection. Today, we have the two known surviving examples of the Schmeisser MK-36, 2. This is one of the two guns that was submitted for the testing for what would eventually become adopted as the MP38 in German service, the new standard German submachine gun of World War II. Now, the other company that was involved was Erma. Erma's lead designer was a guy named Heinrich Vollmer. Schmeisser was the lead designer for the Haenel company. So Haenel manufactured these two, Schmeisser had designed them. And the history here goes back to World War I, where Schmeisser had developed the MP-18, the first German submachine gun. After World War I, of course, the Treaty of Versailles puts limitations on German arms manufacturing. And in order to maintain production, Schmeisser licensed his design out to Piper in Belgium under the Bayard patent, or the Bayard trade name. So this becomes the MP38, and it's actually produced in reasonably large numbers in Belgium. There are a bunch of countries that adopt versions of the MP28, and Schmeisser continues to work on the design. Now, in the early 1930s, the Germans start to work on adopting something new themselves. They're starting to go through that rearmament process, and the early stages of this are still very covert in Germany. This is still a period where they're concerned about maintaining secrecy. Treaty of Versailles, in theory, still prohibits a lot of this development and manufacture. This is where you'll see things like German machine guns being adopted with names that sound like they're from World War I, like the MG-13, which isn't 1913. It's a mid-war, an interwar gun that's they don't really want people to think about too much. At any rate, Schmeisser keeps working on this. The Germans, 1933 to 35 or so, start working on trials for a new gun. There's basically no extant documentation that I'm aware of, but the two companies, Erma and Haenel, respond to the request from the Army for a new submachine gun, and this is what Haenel submits. So we have, like I said, we have two examples here, and they have a number of differences between them. This guy back here is the German trials gun, and the one up here is another version that was actually submitted to Hungarian military trials. So it's clearly the same gun, but has a few subtle differences, and since these are the only two that are known to exist still, I figured we'll take a look at both of them. All right, we'll start with our markings here. This is the MK-36, 2 system Schmeisser. MK, I believe, is Maschinenkarabiner, which probably has more in line with the form factor here of very much a rifle style of gun. The Germans would come back a few years later with MKB, which was also Maschinenkarabiner, but in that case it was a designation used for intermediate caliber guns. The earliest of the 8x33 guns were Maschinenkarabiner. Anyway, 1936 pattern. The comma 2 is sort of a revision indicator. It's something that was used commonly on in the Schmeisser designs between World War I and prior to World War II. So you'll have MP38, 1, MP28, 2, that sort of thing. At the muzzle end here, we have some very Mauser rifle-like elements. We've got a big barleycorn front sight. We have a Mauser type of bayonet that will fit this, and very obviously Mauser stock hardware. So barrel band, or the nose cap is clearly Mauser. The barrel band looks just like a Mauser K98 rifle. Interestingly, the rear sight seems to be more or less copied off of a Swiss K31. That's a little bit unorthodox. Mechanically, this is an open bolt firing, simple blowback submachine gun. The German version is chambered for 9x19mm, standard 9mm parabellum cartridge. It is a little bit unusual that the bolt handle is on the left side of the gun. It does eject out the right side of the gun, which is more normal. For a safety, we just have this locking open notch. Again, this is pretty typical of the time period. The trigger mechanism, very similar to that of the MP28, is a crossbolt for semi-auto or full auto fire. But there is no separate mechanical safety aside from this. Now, curiously, there is a magazine safety in this gun. If we look inside the ejection port at that guy right there, that's a lug that sticks up. And you can see when I'm pushing in on the magazine release, that gets pushed into the side and out of the way. Now, what's kind of curious about this is it doesn't actually prevent the bolt from closing when you don't have a magazine, but it does prevent the bolt from opening. You didn't see it, but when I opened that in the last shot, I was actually holding the magazine release in, which allows me to do that. So when I take a magazine and insert it, that's going to push that, that lug into the side of the receiver, and it allows me to then operate the action. I can't really figure out what the proper justification for this safety mechanism is. Typically, the reason that you want to lock a submachine gun bolt forward is so that it's not possible to drop the gun, have it hit on the butt plate, and have the bolt handle, or bolt, bounce open, grab a cartridge, drop forward, and fire it. That's the typical safety issue of open bolt submachine guns. But this safety is deactivated by having a magazine in the gun. And if the gun has, if the bolt's closed and there's no magazine in it, it is automatically safe. There's no way for there to be a round in the chamber. There's nothing for it to chamber if it bounces open, but that's when this is locked closed, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Best thing I can suggest is perhaps that was a specific dictate of German high command. We know, for example, from the Gewehr 41 rifle trials that they requested a number of elements that really actually didn't make any sense and weren't necessary. And frankly, Walther ended up winning that trial by ignoring the dumb requests. This may be something that Schmeisser felt they were forced to include, even though they thought it was dumb. I should also point out here, this is a Schmeisser magazine. It even says so right there on the side. But this is not the proper magazine for this gun. It fits because Schmeisser would have used his existing magazine design. You know, why reinvent the wheel there? But obviously you can see the magazine stops are not at the proper height for this gun. And with that magazine, it's actually possible to substantially over-insert the mag to the point that it wouldn't function. So you could run the gun with this if you just put it at the proper height. And this is a pretty good representation of what this magazine would have looked like. The originals are reportedly 25 and 32 rounds. This is a 20 rounder. Now let's go ahead and disassemble this. We'll show you the internals. So all I have to do is push in on this button, rotate the end cap just a short distance, and I can pull off the end cap. I can then pull out the recoil spring. It's a large diameter spring, which is nice. The thing with large diameter springs is they essentially fit the diameter of the receiver tube, which means they can't kink. When you have the earlier submachine guns with small diameter springs, you always have issues of reinstalling them without the springs bending and kinking. And the easy solution to that is to just make it a big one. Then we can pull out our bolt assembly. And this, in Schmeisser style, this is the element that would eventually go into, the main element that would go into the MP38, is a separated firing pin from the bolt body. And I believe this was done simply because you wanted different heat treating on the firing pin and the bolt body, and this was seen as an economical way to do that. I'm not 100% certain on that justification, but that's about the best I can come up with. In practice, this is a fixed firing pin because these are going to recoil together. The recoil spring is going to sit right there, but it means you can have differential material or differential heat treat on your firing pin. And I suppose if it does break, it's easy to replace that, and you don't have to replace the whole bolt. Other than that, we just have a sear catch on it. We have an extractor in the corner. We have a slot for an ejector on the bottom. Simple open bolt blowback operation. There's not really anything to show you on this receiver tube. Internally, the only things that stick up in that receiver are the safety that you saw in there. There's your ejector, by the way, fixed ejector. And then there's a disconnector and a sear. And that's it. I do want to also show you the Hungarian version. It has the exact same markings, but they're at the front of the receiver because at the back of the receiver is a whole bunch of fine knurling. Not really clear why. The bolt handle has been moved to a more typical right side of the gun, and that magazine safety has been omitted. It's a little hard to see here, but if we look down inside the ejection port there, you can see that there is no opening for that magazine safety at all. Otherwise, the selector system is identical. The internal components are identical. I'm not going to take this apart because everything inside is exactly the same as the German version. The other differences we have are up here at the front, where we have a nose cap and a front sight that are more stereotypically Hungarian in form. Really the same sort of barleycorn front sight, but it's got a hood and an elevated post here that are more Hungarian. We have a bayonet lug that fits the Hungarian bayonet, and we have a Hungarian-style stacking rod on it. And lastly, the Hungarian gun is actually chambered for 9x25mm Mauser export. You'll notice Schmeisser's magazines were designed for a variety of different cartridges. This is a 9x19 magazine, and it's got a spacer in the back. So going back long before this particular design, Schmeisser knew that he wanted to be able to market his submachine guns in different calibers for different countries, so he specifically designed the magazine and the magazine well to be long enough to fit his longest cartridge, and then the magazines for shorter cartridges had spacers in them like that. So for that reason, like, this magazine will still fit into the Hungarian gun, but in this case you couldn't actually use it because the 9x25 cartridges won't fit in this magazine. They will fit the magazine well, but not this specific magazine. We do know ultimately Hungary did not adopt this. They went with the Curie system of levered delayed guns, which are a subject for an entire video on their own, obviously. We don't have the records from the actual firing trials of this or the Erma MK or MP36, but we do know that the result was essentially that Erma won the trial. But this was largely based on the form factor of the gun, and there were elements of both designs that German High Command liked, or that the trials committee liked. And so what happened was the Erma is fundamentally adopted, but they want to put some of the elements of the Schmeisser into it, namely the bolt and the trigger mechanism. But the Erma has the form factor very similar to the final form of the MP38. I will hopefully be filming one of those Erma prototypes in a little while, so if this video has been out for a long time, you can check out my other video on the Erma 36 pattern. But if you're watching this when it comes out, I don't have that one filmed yet. At any rate, the offer to Schmeisser seems to have been like, well, we're not going to adopt your design, but we do want to take elements of it, and if you let us do that, we'll bring in Haenel as one of our primary manufacturing contractors for the final gun, for the MP38. And that's what ultimately happened. The MP38 was manufactured by two companies, Erma and Haenel. Erma did the initial design, but Haenel was online as a manufacturer extremely quickly. Clearly, they were sort of involved in the process from the beginning. So what you're looking at is kind of the internal half of what would become the MP38. And that is a very cool piece to take a look at. Big thanks to the British Royal Armouries for giving me access to these two to show to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.